every time that a season of Game of Thrones would be about to come on television in the UK, someone from a newspaper would ring me up and say, hey, we've got this great idea. Can you write an essay about how Game of Thrones is really just the Wars of the Roses? And I'd say, yeah, sure, pay me, and of course, there's a secondary industry in George R.R. Martin material, and I'm part of it. It's not. But clearly Stark and Lannister, York and Lancaster. There are all of these. How much was it drawn from the Wars of the Roses? How much was that sort of just convenient material for you to suck into this world?
Well, there was certainly an inspiration, and probably the Wars of the Roses, the single greatest historical inspiration. But I read a lot of popular history. I also read, the history of the Crusades and the Albigensian Crusade and the 100 Years' War, and of course a lot of Nigel Tranter books about the historical fiction about the history of Scotland, which always end badly. The history of Scotland is singularly bloody. If you think Game of Thrones is violent, read some Scottish history.
Scottish history for the Red Wedding, of course.
Yes, the Red Wedding was loosely based on the Black Dinner, as they called it. But of course, once again, I turned it up to 11. And then David and Dan got hold of it for a TV show and turned it up to 14. You can always turn it up a little more. Because the Black Dinner, though, is an interesting case. I say I love history, but I always want to make it clear that I'm not a professional historian. And the histories that I read and the histories that I love are, I guess, what are called popular histories. They're not academic histories. If you accidentally stumble on an academic history, it will probably put you to sleep very quickly, the stuff that the professional historians do. Now, the Black Dinner of Scotland, I don't know how many of you know that, was there was an enmity between the Earl of Douglas, the Black Douglas as he was called, and the King of Scotland. So he invited the Earl of Douglas, gave him a safe passage to come to the castle and discuss it. And they had a lovely dinner. The Earl, who was young, he was only like 18, 19 years old, and he brought his even younger brother, who was like 15 years old, with him. And they had a lovely dinner with the King of Scotland. And then at the end of it, they started playing this very sonorous beat, and some servants entered with a covered platter, underneath which was a black boar's head, which was the symbol of death. And so then they took the Earl and his little 14, 15-year-old brother out, and they beheaded both of them in New York. It's a great story, and I went from that and I constructed the Red Wedding. Of course, that's the story in myth and in popular legend, but then if you read an academic historian, said none of that ever happened. No, they did execute the Earl and all that, but there was no sonorous beat, there was no black boar's head. All of that stuff was invented later. And maybe it was, but whoever invented it was a pretty good storyteller. I like the popular version of it much better than I like the boring academic version of it. I think sometimes in the study of history there must be someone, maybe he's at Harvard or Yale or at Oxford or Cambridge over here. I don't know what his name is, but his job is to sit in an office and go over history and make it as boring as possible. Take out all the fun bits and the colorful bits and make it really dull.
The rest of us have put them back in. There's a question here from Laura Ann via Twitter, which sort of connects to this. She says, a lot of your female characters are very empowered and motivated. Which other fictional or historical female characters did you draw inspiration from, if any?
Well, again, there was a lot of them. Eleanor of Aquitaine, of course, was a major one. She was one of the most kick-ass women of the Middle Ages. And as you know, she had her own crusade, or she went on crusade, rather, and she married two kings and then was the father of several, or was the mother of several more. She was a great character. There's also a lot of if you read the Italian history, a lot of during the Italian Middle Ages and Renaissance period, there were a lot of very powerful and bloody women who controlled various city-states in Italy and did some amazing things. There's one very famous story that, again, is probably made up by some popular historian or legend maker. because it occurs in like, the same story is told of like 6 different men and at least 2 different women, and it's the one where the father and or mother is in a castle, and they have a son outside who they're going to hang. Surrender the castle, or we're going to hang your son right in front of you. And this story is told of William Marshall, the great knight's father, who supposedly pulled up his jerkin or whatever the hell he was wearing and showed him his dick and said, "Go ahead, hang him, I have the equipment to make more." And that same story is also told of, I think, Catherine Sforza of the Italians, where, they were going to hang her son, and she lifted up her skirts and pointed at her vagina and said, "No, I can make another one, see, right here." So probably it never happened at all, since it's attached to 6 people. But God, it's a great story. I can't resist things like that. And don't be surprised if I steal it and you see it in a later Game of Thrones book.
One more question here submitted from an audience member. Aurélie Passy, I think is the name. The second volume of Fire and Blood won't come out anytime soon, so very pessimistic about your output. maybe with some justification. But could you give us an idea of some elements that it will contain? We go up to the reign of Aegon the Unlucky here. What are the highlights of the putative next volume of this?
Well, I mean, this book only goes up to the regency of Aegon. It ends when Aegon III actually reaches manhood and takes control. So I have his reign to cover, which includes the death of the last dragons. Although Aegon III is called the Dragonbane, there are still 3 or 4 dragons kicking around when he takes the crown, and there are none by the time he's over. So that one thing I was going to cover, why and what happens there, and some of the troubles and rebellions of his reign. And then ultimately his children, who are fairly interesting. I mean, he has ultimately 5, one of whom is Daeron I, the young dragon who conquers Dorne. And he's a 14-year-old Alexander the Great kind of hero king figure. But he dies young, and then his brother Baelor takes over. And Baelor is very religious, he's more of a St. Louis kind of figure. A little extreme in his religiosity, and among other things, he imprisons his 3 sisters in luxurious imprisonment in the Red Keep, the Maiden Hole, but he doesn't like them walking around the court because they tempt him with, they have breasts and things underneath their clothes, and he finds that very disturbing to contemplate, so he hides them away. So I'll tell their stories, and I'll tell Baelor's story, and then after him, we get a brief reign of Viserys the second, and then Viserys' son Aegon IV, Aegon the Unworthy, takes over, and he's a very colorful figure himself. I obviously drew on Henry VIII for him. Henry VIII had 6 wives. Aegon the Unworthy had 9 mistresses, and they all exist in my head. I know who they all were and what happened to each of them, and who had their head chopped off, and who had affairs and who did what. So there's a lot of cool material of that. And then you get into the Blackfyre rebellions, which were 5. I've referred to them frequently, so I'll get all the details on the Blackfyre rebellions. And ultimately, we'll get up to the Mad King and Robert's Rebellion. And that's where I'll draw it to a close. But when am I going to write it? Well, I got to finish Winds of Winter first, and then probably a Dunk and Egg, and then, I don't know. I need more hours in the day, and I need to be 20 years younger and all of that. But you can only write one word at a time, so that's what I'm doing.
Well, George, fittingly, perhaps we're running late, and I want to carry on, but I can feel eyes. I do have one more question for you, which is, in this book we have many, many dragons and many, many Valyrian steel swords. And if you could ride one dragon and wield one sword, which would it be?
Well, if I could ride on one dragon, I might as well go with the biggest, which would be Balerion the Black Dread. He's the mega dragon in this early book. He's the only one that remembers Valeria past a certain point. because he was brought over from Valeria at a little before the doom of Valeria, and he's the biggest and meanest of the dragons that exist. If I could wield only one sword, I don't think it would be any of the Targaryen swords. It would be Dawn, the sword wielded by the Sword of the Morning, the heir of House Dane of Starfall, which is made from the metal from a fallen star. And who knows what magical properties fallen stars bring to Earth.
Well, I think you've got a bit of fallen star in you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are, I'm afraid we're out of time, so we've arranged for Valerian the Black Dread to take George off to dinner. So George is very shortly going to leave the stage. I'm going to ask all of you not to leave your seats just for a moment, because otherwise Valerian's going to eat you. Wait till we've gone is what I'm saying. I'm very sorry we have to go, but it has been, I think you'll all agree, an enormous privilege and an utter joy and a pleasure to have with us the one and only George R. R. Martin.